Hey everyone, this is Erica Lucas, your host and founding member of VEST, an organization connecting women across industries, regions, and career levels so that together we can expedite the pipeline of more women in positions of power and influence. Welcome to another episode of the Vester podcast, where we explore the invisible barriers holding women back in the workplace and share stories of women building power collectively.
Culturally, we're sort of put in a position to be at odds with one another, which not always, but I think that there's this tendency for men to be able to have more identities and be more sort of like, men work and have kids. Like that doesn't mean that their dad identity is now and they're, switching their hat off. One thing I talk about in therapy a lot with clients is we all have everything within us, and so when we have a part of our identity that's more, maybe I do like to be at home with my kids, and, how can we work towards embracing those parts of ourselves versus being rejecting or judging?
I identify right now as a trad wife because I don't have a job and I'm at home like cooking for my husband. But then also I am a childless cat lady because I don't have kids. I have cats. I'm like incredibly liberal. But I think there's like this politicalization of the movements. And I'm just curious about like the thoughts of the far right embracing trad wives or the left embracing the single, or childless cat lady. And like what that does and how that I think is controlling the narrative a little bit and not allowing us to actually embrace everything and whatever role you want to be.
How could we as a community, just get loud and also like support our peers about really owning multiple identities? I feel like society and media and politics in a lot of ways wants to like take from us as women.
In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Vanessa Scaringi, a licensed psychologist and co-owner of Calm Counseling in Austin, Texas. Dr. Scaringi recently authored an insightful article in Time magazine examining the psychological effects of modern identity trends like the soft girl and trad wife movements. Together, we'll dive into the psychological implication of these trends, including the childless cat lady stereotype and the polarization of women's roles. We'll discuss how these labels shape our identities, influence societal expectations, and affect our mental well-being, all while also exploring strategies for challenging and redefining these narratives. For our guests' full bios and show notes, go to www.besther.co/podcast. If you enjoy the episode, share it with a friend and don't forget to leave us a review. This episode is brought to you by Vester Ventures, a peer network of professional women and investment fund for women-led companies in the care economy and future of work. To learn more, go to www.besther.co. This episode was part of a more intimate coaching session with Vest members and has been repurposed to accommodate this episode. How are modern identity trends like the soft girl, the trad wife, cat lady movements shaping women's mental health and self-perception?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I actually came across the soft girl trend. I think it was in a Glamour magazine article, maybe the year prior. And I'm not on TikTok. I'm not really on a lot of social media. So I didn't know what this was. And when I read the piece, I was just sort of dumbfounded, like, wait a minute, it's 2023 at that point. What's happening here? I was a women's studies major and I'm old. And so that was in 2002, 2003, and I felt like at that point, the tides were turning and women were becoming more rooted in, empowering themselves and feeling like they could have high achieving jobs and make a lot of money. And so to see this like trend picking up and gaining steam was really terrifying. So I'm derailing from your actual question, but in terms of how it's shaping women, I think I got concerned, like wanting to understand how it is shaping women. In my therapy practice, I do see a lot of the Gen Z folks leaning on some of those I guess, the mentality of sort of a soft girl, not necessarily embracing that culture completely, but just having a hard time. There's a rise I work in eating disorders. There's a rise in eating disorders. There's a rise in depression and suicidality and all these in that generation specifically. And I was thinking about, is there a link between these two things? Like, is there some kind of pressure I'm not seeing in women to stay at home, or I don't even just mean not work, but just not push themselves and sort of not, I think there's all this debate about young workers. So anyway, but that's what led me to thinking more about these things. And as far as how is it shaping women, I think there's a mental health implication. I think what I see is that that's happening. I think young women might feel a little fearful of pushing themselves or achieving certain things when there's sort of this whatever cat cult, like, that comment that was made. There's fear. There's a lot of fear, a lot of trepidation about what it means to be able to push yourself nowadays and get out of your comfort zone.
And also, I think it has to do a lot with like your atmosphere, right? Like a lot of our vast members are actually in the middle of the country where, the environment in which you operate, the environment in which you live can actually dictate a lot of how you show up at work. And, I often, before some of the members joined, Leslie and I were joking about some of my social media presence, which is all over the place, but I get asked all the time or told all the time that, given backhanded compliments by people saying, well, if I acted like you, or if I showed up like you on social media, I wouldn't be able to do anything, right? Because I'm very politically engaged. But we would never tell men that, right?
Yeah.
Like I have friends, CEOs, CFOs, partners that are always engaging in politics, always talking about why they support one thing over the other.
Yeah.
And we just see that as normal. But when women do it, it's like, oh my gosh. Now, I do tend to be a little bit I say whatever it's on my mind, but I just, unfortunately, I still see how this perception of how we impose as a society things on women that make them think, oh, I should act like this, or I should fit more on this based on what is most acceptable in your environment or in the culture that you're currently residing.
Yeah. And there's a lot of fear involved of what will the repercussions be if I put myself out there. It's very scary.
For sure. For sure. In your Time article, you discuss how these identity trends can create both comfort and constraint for women. Can you elaborate on the psychological impact of embracing these identities and how, they can empower but also limit women in some sense?
Yeah, I was thinking about in that piece, the comfort part, I think, is more sort of, it's a bottlenecking experience where it might provide some instant comfort where there's avoidance. I think in the piece I talked about like treat culture and sort of ignoring some of the other, bigger things that we might have on our plates. And I don't know if people are familiar with treat culture. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's like the idea of, oh, I've got a hard day, so I'm going to like treat myself to, whatever, a coffee, or I do that. Spent $8 on a latte today. Like these things are expensive and they feel really good and warm and yummy in the moment. But over time, what are we avoiding if we're not really tackling the bigger picture? And then there's this other side part of like financially as women, how are we positioning ourselves if we're ignoring how expensive things have gotten, or if we sort of hide behind some of these other avoidance strategies. So I think in that regard, there's some comfort in the short term, but ultimately, I think embracing some of these trends can be really damaging in the long term. For how can you sustain yourself if you're avoiding? What happens if you're hiding behind some kind of identity? Or I think there was a piece on the stay-at-home girlfriend trend, and I think it was in the Washington Street Journal. I think so. But just the financial impact of like, I don't know how many stay-at-home girlfriends there really are, but there are a lot of influencers on social media that portray themselves that way, who also ironically make a lot of money from being on influencers on social media. But, if you're dependent on other people for your income and not, working to provide for yourself, how are you hurting yourself ultimately in the long run?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm currently reading a book, Cultish. Has anybody read that book? Um, Creating community, right? Like sometimes we identify with a trend or something because we desperately crave community. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I feel that way. Here I am bringing my bias, but, I feel like this cat lady movement, I'm like, hell yeah, I've never had a cat in my life. And I'm actually not necessarily a cat person, but now I'm like, I identify as a childless cat lady, even though I have two
Yeah.
beautiful girls. But I think it's more like I wanted a community, right? Like, hey, unapologetic women who are
Yeah.
saying what they need to say for whatever reason. And so I
Mhm.
feel like sometimes to your point, the comfort is to create community, to find
Yes.
some sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's super important as well. But long term,
Hugely
yeah,
important.
but
Yeah.
long term, like I also have to remind myself, hey, you also need to talk to women who disagree with you and understand why. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
let's talk about the trad wife. I did not know anything about this until Courtney and Jay and Gabby brought this to me. And so is everybody familiar? Raise your hand if you've read a little bit or saw the TikToks I was like completely clueless. But this is
Yeah.
apparently Valerina, based on one creator that's a Valerina Farm, I believe, very
Mm-hmm.
successful, has created a very successful brand. Decided to live more. So the trad wife is traditional. Like I literally had to look it up because I was
Yeah.
completely. So traditional wives, but meaning, I'm going to live in a farm. I'm going to, raise, I think they have 8 children. I can't remember how many children. Um,
I'm sure they've lost count too.
Right. But they live off of the farm, but then they also create content, and then now they sell items, and they've like made millions, and she has like 8 million people or something following her. Um,
Her
but then
dad, or I think it's her dad or his dad also owned or owns JetBlue. So
right,
there's also a lot of money that they've had. And,
exactly,
yeah.
right. Yeah. So if you haven't been following this is again somebody that very successful and has kind of made a career off of being this trend, this identity. But recently there was an article, I forget, you guys are going to have to help me, Gabby and Courtney here, but there was an article that kind of was very judgmental of her choices. So Courtney, you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, she had a I don't know if it was a contributor or an editor from the Times come out to their farm to do a piece on she and her family. She thought the conversation went really well. And then of course the piece aired and exploded and really like pinpointed a singular identity of her life, which was the much more traditional way of living versus like speaking wholly about like what they've created. And she is very much like a businesswoman. And so just kind of created this like really difficult narrative that she felt wasn't fully encompassing and didn't at all expect that the conversation was going to end up and air in that way. And so felt really burned by that, which I think leads to an interesting point. Like we as women, a lot of times, maybe we identify as more like traditional wives or moms and families, but it doesn't mean that we can't be and do these other things and own that too. And I think society, I want to say it was a woman that wrote that article, Gabby, I'm not sure. But even like sometimes women to women can like try to put each other in a single box, which is just so dangerous. So I actually have followed Ballerina Farm for a long time, and I really enjoy her as a creator. And I think it's amazing what she and her family have built and find a lot of admiration for her. But this article just in recent days and conversation is really blown up in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think, that's where I was going with my point. It's like, so in one way you have the trad wife, and then in another one, you have the nominee for vice president, calling women who choose whether they choose or whatever for whatever reason, they don't have children, because they don't have children, they can't be productive members of society and they're not contributing to society and therefore they shouldn't vote and all of this stuff. And the child cat lady movement kind of takes form. So my question is, how can we as women, what are the implications of us as women attaching ourselves so much to one or the other, and then how we as women need to be more supportive and understanding and not be not lashed out right at the other just for choosing a different lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're also talking about something just more generally, even just how hard it is to have discourse and to sit with people who disagree. But yes, as women, I think there's an added component. I remember back in my college years, I think there was a book called The Mommy Wars, and it was about stay-at-home moms versus working moms. And, culturally, we're sort of put in a position to be at odds with one another, which not always, but I think that there's this tendency for men to be able to have more identities and be more sort of like, men, I'm using air quotes, but y'all can see me, but men work and have kids. Like that doesn't mean that their dad identity is now and they're, switching their hat off. And I think that for women, there's probably some fear-based. Like I imagine that woman going out to ballerina farms and interviewing, feeling very fearful of like, what is this going to mean if people like this one, the ballerina farms brand? Like, is it going to take us back? Like, I don't think I think there's a lot of fear potentially. And I also think that one thing I talk about in therapy a lot with clients is we all have everything within us, and so when we have a part of our identity that's more, maybe I do like to be at home with my kids, and, how can we work towards embracing those parts of ourselves versus being rejecting or judging or, and I think if we could extend that sort of grace to others, we could understand why, maybe there's a good reason someone's doing what they're doing. I think with the trad wife brand or sort of trend, it's so provocative and it's so like, it's also so clearly they're making money from this. And so what they're promoting is also like, obviously not what they necessarily do or believe. Like, I actually don't know much about the ballerina farms brand, but I was thinking about another one. And I wish that they would if they could just say openly, like, I make a lot of money from this, that might disarm people so that they could be more curious. But I think there's this like, in the influencer world, we want to believe someone is just living their whole life in the way that they're telling us. But the reality is, I'm sure that woman's going to business meetings. I'm sure she's up to date on what new products they're launching or whatever. And if we could know more, it would actually be more helpful.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you nailed it, right? It's like even just having the conversation. That's why this session was so important for us to have it, because I really do think that we are at a crucial moment where, regardless of how you feel about certain issues, women's rights are at stake, right? We actually have less rights that we did just a few years ago that our grandmothers fought so hard for.
Yeah.
And I always say to people that are like, I think we're all pro-life. I mean, who's anti, but I always say to my friends who are, uncomfortable with even saying the word abortion, it's like, listen, it's not about taking that right away from you. If you don't want to have one, or if you can believe whatever religious belief you want to believe, but we can't impose it on other people, right? And we have to protect other people. And then also we're talking about privacy, all of these things. But for me, I always take it very intentionally to say, hey, it's okay. I'm this way. I love working. I think I'm a better mom when I'm working, and I think my girls will attest to that. But I also respect women that choose to stay at home for whatever reason. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we create more conversations about being supportive and understanding of different lived experiences, of different women with different backgrounds, just because my experience may be completely different than somebody else's here in the room. And we need to have empathy and the room and the safe room to have those conversations so that we can be even more supportive. Particularly, like I said, in times like today when our rights and women's contribution are being diminished at the national level in politics.
I mean, there's always the concern that I have, if women are at odds with one another, then we're not fighting for things that are really important,
Exactly. Right. We're over here discussing the trad wife and childless cat lady, when in reality we should be talking about,
I mean, it's all very interesting, but yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Leah. Excuse me. I think that everyone should be whatever they want, and I don't care. Like, I identify right now as a trad wife because I don't have a job and I'm at home, like, cooking for my husband. But then also I am a childless cat lady because I don't have kids. I have cats. I'm like incredibly liberal. But I think there's like this politicalization of the movements, and I'm just curious about like the thoughts of the far right embracing trad wives or the left embracing the single, or childless cat lady, and like what that does and how that I think is controlling the narrative a little bit and not allowing us to actually embrace everything and whatever role you want to be. And I actually think this like also plays into like this very binary, view of life, especially maybe on the right, where you have to be one thing and that to me gets in the way of like policy when you're talking about, gay rights or trans kids or abortion or whatever. And I'm curious to know about the thoughts that everybody has about kind of how we've taken this and made everything political.
And also how other people are defining what we should be. And, you're either here or here as opposed to us, right? That's a great question. What do you think, Vanessa?
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. I think there was also another piece that was about trad wives being for men. I think that men are sort of perpetuating, I forget what school it was, but some speech, someone came out and talked about how women should be a certain, whatever, ascribing roles to women. And yeah, I think men are perpetuating a lot of the rhetoric around that. I also think that, everything being binary, everything being like, you're here, you're against me if you believe one thing, just there's no progress that comes from that. And unfortunately, I do think that with social media, there's a lot of, that's just what gets clicks. And there's a lot of incentive to sort of stay in those very like dichotomized lanes. And I don't know if it actually, like, as we're sitting here talking, it sounds like we're all sort of probably agreeing that like we can agree to disagree. There's space for nuance. But when you translate any of that online, it's just like there's attacking, there is no space for nuance online, which is really scary. And that's where so many people get their messaging. That's where so many, that's just where people live. I think that there was a study about how many hours we spend online a day, and it's something like 6 hours. So if that's where you're spending all your days, yeah, you sort of think of the world in these ways, and it's not reality.
Mm-hmm. So that actually leads to my next question perfectly. How can we, given everything we've just talked about, how can women maintain a strong sense of identity while facing all of these societal pressures, whether you're in social media or not? And how do we combat conforming to roles that are defined by somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, that's like a lifelong of therapy right there. But I think ultimately surrounding yourself with other women who are uplifting and are curious rather than, combative or prescriptive. And I also think really trying to internalize, like, I can be anything in any moment. Like, maybe this is a phase of my life where I'm doing more of X or less of Y, but it doesn't have to define me, and knowing that that's okay. And that, I mean, I think it's so much easier said than done. I think the surrounding yourself with other women helps you helps inoculate yourself to the rhetoric that we can all be exposed to. But I have friends who are, stay-at-home moms. I have friends who work. I have friends who are in between, like being able to come together and support one another in those journeys and know that none of that is a reflection on me. Like what they're deciding to do with their lives is like, that doesn't necessarily affect me unless they're telling me I'm wrong. But I don't have a lot of friends that do that.
You talked about the need for therapy, right? And I know that
I'm biased, I know.
and we have in a way destigmatized it, but not have we really? Like, how many women are you actually seeing that are reaching out for therapy support, for professional support, and how can they find it?
Yeah, so another area I'm quite biased in is finding good therapy. I mean, I think right now we're sort of inundated with I might get a little on my soapbox, but a lot of the VC backed therapy world, which is like BetterHelp. I mean, you can't listen to a podcast without being exposed to a commercial for BetterHelp. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with a lot of what BetterHelp does, but I think there's the tendency for some of those platforms to really reinforce the idea that that we should be better, that we need to like have a problem and recover from it. And some of that's just reflected in like they give a lot of questionnaires about your progress and your therapy and things like that, which none of that's inherently wrong. But when we're told that we have problems that we need to fix versus like being really curious in a long-term kind of capacity, that's where I do long-term therapy. I do a lot of group therapy, and I think real healing comes from that kind of experience. As far as like, I think women might be more, I mean, women are more likely to reach out for therapy. It's a little less of a stigma, still heavily there, probably dependent on where you live. I'm in Austin, very liberal. You can spit and hit a therapist here. So I know it's very like a normalized experience here, but gosh, you go to 2 hours and I know it's not. So yeah, I think approaching, if you are going to go to therapy, with like, how can I just use this time to be curious about myself? And group therapy, I'm also really biased about. I think that's where it's just transformative. I think a lot of women especially can find themselves like stretching the limit in terms of how they can take in people. I'm just thinking about what we're talking about with nuance. Group therapy is such a place to build that capacity for nuance, because you can sit with people from different backgrounds and know that you're all there for the same reason of trying to develop more curiosity, empathy, healing. And that can be really uplifting. I think you would ask like, what about where you can reach out or find things? Yeah, I mean, right now we're sort of inundated with a lot of money being spent on advertising for therapy. And so I would turn to like the mom and pop kinds of therapists in your community. If possible. I know there's barriers and accessibility there, but ask about sliding scale, things, work with someone to maybe try to get that need met in a different way. And it doesn't have to be if their fee is something that they won't budge. And not to deter anyone from BetterHelp or anything like that, but just be curious.
Going back to something that you said about letting other people define our identity and imposing that, and that being primarily males doing that. One of my biggest issues with this is, and even just this whole conversation, is that once again, we're focusing on fixing women, right? What do we need to do, to fix ourselves, as if there's something wrong with us? When in reality, and to your point earlier, when you say, we're so focused on having these conversations, which in my argument is we should instead be focusing on what leads women to quit the labor force in general, right? And which a lot of times has to do with workplaces were never designed with us in mind. And,
Yep.
sometimes workplaces are so rigid, they don't have the flexibility that not just women, but working parents, caregivers have to do. And so, I have like a love-hate relationship with the fact that women are launching businesses faster than our male peers, Latina 6 times faster. But I also know why, right? And it's because the corporate setting doesn't work for us. And so we then have to be creative and figure out how to bring additional revenue to
Yeah.
the home. So I want to have those conversations, right? Because then that places the responsibility on us as a society and as a community to look at workspaces, right? Our workspaces, how can we make them more flexible, more supportive for the workers, right? Not just the owners and the employers. So I hope that one of the takeaways for the VEST members here is that, when we're having these conversations, they're important to have, and we need to see, like, how do we keep ourselves accountable? How do we embrace other personalities or other, identities, if you will? But also, how do we take this back to the larger conversation of like what leads us to behave a certain way or to do certain things? I wish that the whole on the trad wife, my bias was, I am concerned sometimes on how much the decision was made by women, right?
Mhm.
To live a traditional life, to be the wife, to have X amount of kids, to do certain things. If it was genuinely hers, then I'm all for it, right? And hell, let me invest in you and let me invest in your company and whatever. But sometimes I just feel like we're led to those identities. We're led to making some of those decisions. So just want to encourage VEST members to keep that in mind as you continue, like as we have these conversations and to look at the broader picture of how it's affecting us from a societal perspective.
Does anyone have anyone in their lives that they disagree with on these topics? Like, are they fielding comments about their own work or?
I personally experience it with my sister, and it is not her choice. So I just feel like an entanglement of like my stomach just drops. And I've seen her become a shell of a person over the last 15 years. I get really emotional talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough too, right? That's something that I also, in reading and educating myself on again, the ballerina deal, it's not her. So let's take the persona or um, it's just, and I am into cults recently. So not saying that, anything is a cult or anything, but just how the psychology, right, of what leads you again to join certain groups, to identify with certain identities. And then, especially if it's somebody that you love, like you want to help, you want to say something, but then that sometimes that just makes it worse. So what do you do? Are you just supportive and let, whoever be whoever they need to be, or what is our role in that? Or how would you coach us, Vanessa? How would you provide therapy to us if we're in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. Thank you so much for sharing. I think when there's a lack of choice for, especially with something so big and profound as your career and your this big part of your identity, we lose passion, we lose, friends, start to lose ourselves. And as far as, um, coaching anyone around this, I'm thinking about just how to help someone regain the sense of choice. But it's also really hard. I mean, we're literally talking about a time for women where we're losing our, freedoms and choices. And so just being someone there to talk to without judgment is a huge win. Because hopefully there is a time where someone sort of can come out of that and regain some of the feelings of choice or empowerment. I think of having young kids. I have two littles, and you do feel like you don't, I mean, there's choices just start to go out the window. If I have to pick up one of my kids from school, I have to cancel my clients for the rest of the day. There's just realities, and helping people to know that ultimately, like, there's going to be a time I'm going to move away from that. My kids are going to be older. I'm not going to have to run off and pick them up, and helping them tolerate that, being ear to listen, in those moments can be really impactful.
Thank you so much for sharing, Emily. I know that's tough. If there's anything that we can do collectively to support you during this times, even if it's just to listen without judgment, please reach out one-on-one during the VEST sessions, whatever we need to do. Who else wants to share?
Well, I wanted to add something really quickly to what Vanessa said. And I think what's important is us advocating for each other when you're in a position of power and talking about it openly, what it could look like. And so, like, throughout my career, my husband was in the military and did a ton of deployments, and I was raising 2 kids by myself, but working full time. And when we talk about like childcare and how expensive that is, and then how like least flexible your schedule can be. And so when I started in my role now at BBB, the thing I told my board was like, I need an extremely flexible schedule because I have no other options. I don't have family that live here. I'm a great fit for this role and I want to do good, but I need these other things. And they were really on board, which was helpful. But that also meant that when I had team members who were struggling with it, we would talk about it and I'd say, okay, here's what I've done and been in your situation. So there's a lot of solutions. So it doesn't always have to look like the black or white, like I have to stay home or I can work, or like there's so much of an opportunity to really think outside the box. And I feel like a lot of times we get stuck in this narrative of like, well, if you can't be at work from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, or whatever that looks like, then you have to be a stay-at-home, spouse. And that's not really true. So as employers, I think we really need to do a better job of helping people see alternatives. The thing for us, I have a lot of young single parents on my team. And so we implemented full remote summers. And it's because I needed it. My kids are 12 and 16, but I still need it. And so Memorial Day to Labor Day, we're 100% remote. And if you need to come into the office, maybe to meet with a client or whatever that looks like work it into your schedule. But and so I think that's the big opportunity that we have is as a workplace showcasing what could be. Because a lot of times when we talk to small businesses and they're like, well, this is what it's supposed to look like. I'm like, it's supposed to look like that because other people told you that. It's your business. Make it look like what works for you and what works for your team so you can hire people. And when we talk to people and they're like, I can't hire enough people, it's like, well, then you're going to have to get creative on what those roles look like and how you ask people to show up. And so I think we have a responsibility to really be advocates for what can be, what's the possibility.
So. I 100% agree with that, Kit. Thank you so much for sharing again, because that also displaces the shame or the blame into the individual or the woman or the person, right? And then it places it on us as a society, as employers, as, colleagues, if you're not, in a position of power to do it. I think that there's also a lot of power in us women sharing our stories, regardless of our title, regardless of our position of power, because the more we learn that, oh shit, we're going through the same stuff. Even though I'm in venture and you're a nonprofit and you're over here, we're actually dealing with the same struggles. And we perhaps need to be more understanding and compassionate towards one another and really try to, like you said at the beginning, Vanessa, be curious about learning from each other's experiences.
Yeah. Fighting the system and not each other. Start there.
100%. As we are heading into the election, it's hard not to talk about, kind of how this implicates this discussion on a broader level, on a political level, without, asking anybody to vote a certain way or to follow a certain thing. It's just listening to how people talk about these issues. That's all I ask. Right? It's to listen how people are defining women, listen to how people are putting people on different boxes, what resonates and what will lead us, to your point, Vanessa, to then fix systems rather than each other or ourselves. Because I think that this conversation is so timely as everything that's evolving on the political spectrum. And it can be very hateful. And it's actually hurting the way we get along with our neighbors, is causing more harms in our communities, is causing more division. It might seem like something that's societal, but it's actually being implemented in policies, right, that are actually hurting women at work. Women, if you're an entrepreneur, your ability to access capital, your ability to build companies and be empowered to do that, if you want to. So I just think it's more than just a cultural shift. It's more than just a trend. It's something that we need to just continue to have conversations on and not be shy about it, right? Not say, well, it's not politically correct to do so, or well, even if the fear is there, right? Even if the fear is there, we have to lean in towards it. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's actually part of feeling uncomfortable is because we're growing. And one of my biggest concerns is that as a society, we've gotten away from feeling that discomfort. Like we want to just feel okay, and we want to be in our own bubble, and we want to build community just with people that think like us. So I just challenge ourselves to continue to have these conversations. Vanessa, in talking about this, how can this community support one another when we're navigating identity challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're reiterating some of the getting curious, just being able to hold on to nuance and understand, develop empathy, understand where someone's coming from so that you can ultimately uplift one another. And I think if you really understand where someone's coming from, there's less judgment. There's the desire to really walk in their shoes and help them versus like judge or cast criticism. Or I think really, obviously, a group of women coming together here, everyone's sort of invested in being part of a community and uplifting one another. So that's already, you're doing the work right there. But if you can just deepen that curiosity with one another, I think that's huge.
I have to ask this because one of the things that I have noticed is if we're talking about these identities and these trends, right? When we're talking about the soft girl and trad wife, it's hard not to notice the lack of diversity in women of color being represented. It seems to be primarily white women that are kind of leading this and doing this. Is that just me that just saw that because this is like I'm coming in late to this? Is that something you've seen? Is that something that you've seen in practice?
I mean, to be honest, I don't see a lot of like soft girl, given that I'm not on social media, I don't necessarily take in a lot of that information. I think the origins of soft girl were rooted in something that was women of color initially, but I think it was sort of hijacked. And the soft girl stuff is it's really based in an aesthetic of like makeup looking a certain way and wanting, this quiet luxury and all these sort of Gen Z types of styles. But I do think at the end of the day, there's definitely a bias, and white women probably more present in that world, or at least what white women being covered more. There's also that part, the attention given. Mm-hmm.
Based upon my friendship circle, have seen it true that women of color are being hired into those roles and are not being supported sufficiently in those roles, kind of being the first, and leave them because it's not a sustainable environment. And so I think that there's a real crisis there of making sure that we create spaces that will sustain women of color in leadership roles, so that they're not the first and the last.
100%, Shannon.
I'm curious too, because I can't help but think, obviously, this is like a very trend-centric conversation, and social media and media drives so much. But I'm just thinking about all of the traditional wives and the childless cat ladies who aren't. receiving brand sponsorships and they don't have this extra income, but that's truly just like who they are, maybe what they're choosing to embody by choice, or maybe they're being led there. We don't know, but how could we as a community, one, just get loud and also like support our peers and women about really owning kind of the and celebrating multiple identities beyond kind of getting curious. But that's something I feel like that society and media and politics in a lot of ways wants to like take from us as women, is being able to like own and be loud about like owning the power of and.
Oh, for sure. Well, I think, strict gender roles are damaging to everyone. They're damaging to men too. And I think women are historically not encouraged to get mad, but I think this is a moment to get really mad and to talk openly about the anger of like, please don't pigeonhole me. Or, if someone's a stay-at-home parent, like that doesn't only define me. It doesn't mean anything. Being able to really advocate for oneself in whatever they're deciding, and know that if it's because they're wanting to do that, then, being able to own that, and it doesn't have to be rigid.
Mm-hmm. That's so powerful. I love that.
I love how you stated that question, Courtney. And it's actually, for me, it's like, we want to be intentional of also recruiting more women into the network. And how do we recruit more women that, immediately, maybe intentionally or, unconsciously put us in a bucket, right? Oh, they're just a bunch of liberal ladies,
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, we're just here to support one another, right? And we're not a cult. We have different belief systems. We have different, I'm just always thinking about that. Like, and I want to put it on to the vast members. How can we recruit more members who might have not necessarily the wrong impression, but the idea that maybe this is not a safe space for them, right? Because they might not 100% identify with how we stand and how we show up, the limited view that they have.
Erica, it's Leah. Courtney, thank you for saying that. So I very much have always identified as someone who does not have children. Like I made a very strong choice when I was like a kid myself that I was not going to do it. It's not for me. I think one of the major issues with all of this is that there's so many assumptions. Like that's the problem, I think, is that people make assumptions like, oh, well, maybe you can't have children or you hate children. Like, and none of that's not true. I want to be invited to your kid's birthday party. Like I want to be able to support, but like, I have some friends that just assume that because I've made choices that I've been vocal about that I don't understand, or I don't want to do something, or I don't want to be a part of it. And I think across the board, regardless of which direction you're going, if we could all take a step back and like try to remove some of those assumptions and go in, and Erica, you've said this before, with curiosity and trying to figure out like, okay, why do I feel this way about your decision? Right. And I think we can all start there. And it really is just like putting your assumptions in the trash can and like moving on with your life. And it's a richer life too, because you get to meet so many more people and understand so many more points of views. And I think social media just puts you in this box, and you assume so much more because of it, because it's like right there in your face all the time.
That tends to be the one thing I'm black and white about is social media consumption. It's like less is better.
Less is best.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm kind of giggling here at all the like cat references, the words usage, curiosity, and things like that have been popping up. And I'm just back here laughing. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these girls are going to think I'm crazy. I'm back here giggling, but it's just kind of funny because I'm a cat person, and like I'm just hearing all these little cat things all over the place. But everybody's awesome, and I love it when people expand their minds. And to me, labeling even yourself, which is why I joined this call today, by the way, is because of stuff I'm battling within myself. Labeling yourself, even, I mean, give yourself a break. I've labeled myself to death, because I'm a mom, I'm, all these things. I've been a career woman, and I'm now, you kind of pin yourself down into this little box and you just go, what? You have no wiggle room for growth. And I want to challenge everybody to give everybody humanity and grace and kindness and not pin them down in a box. Because I kind of am feeling sorry for men right now, man, because like women rock. We are blasting the roofs off of businesses, and employers are just like, what are we doing? These girls have like accelerated our revenue. What, in a 1 year's time? I mean, it's just, I think that we as women have a huge opportunity to share what we've been given to other younger women. And that's what I'd like to do. I mean, like a mentorship here, I wod love to do something like that to encourage, like Emily talking a minute ago. I feel like I would be really good to talk with her because I think I could encourage her in a constructive way. But, I think you all are awesome. Thank you for speaking up. Sorry to talk so long.
Okay, first of all, never apologize at a best session for contributing. First rule of thumb, but thank you so much for sharing, Shelley, and thank you for offering to support Emily. Yeah, I think that's why we're here, right? To like create not just group support and peer support, but one-on-one support. So thank you for that. Well, unfortunately, once again, we've run out of time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But Vanessa, I definitely want people. First of all, we want to keep reading your articles, so please keep them going, keep us engaged, send them to us, and we're happy to amplify them. But how can VEST members and anybody listening to the podcast later on get a hold of you and connect with you?
Yeah. Email. I don't know if you blast out my email, Vanessa Scaringi, PhD at Gmail. So I can write it in the chat. And I have a Substack, so I'm new to the writing world, but really enjoying it. And if you subscribe, you'll see my articles quickly. It's called A Side of Freud, because I'm in the psychology field.
You can't tell. Stop telling people that you're new to writing, because based on your Times article, it doesn't cause that. So you don't need to say that.
Yeah, not apologetically new, just getting really into it now. Really energized by it. Newly energized by it.
Any last minute takeaways, Vanessa, for us?
I think I'm so lucky that I got connected with you. I think just continue to do what you're doing. It sounds like growing this network and building on that is huge. Women supporting women is such a big deal and so important. So you're already doing it. Just more of it.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and don't forget to leave us a review. And if you're ready to take your career to the next level, apply to join our community of professional women, all eager to help you get there and stay there. Go to www.vesthurt.co and apply today.